Vicky Edmonds is our first speaker, who is joint head of the Office of Low Emission Vehicles and a job with her job share partner, Natasha Robinson. Vicky's worked with the government for around 15 years on a range of environmental policy roles and tackling issues related to freight sector emissions, air quality and aviation noise emissions. So Vicky, your 10 minutes start now.
Thank you. Hi, so yeah, thank you, Alok, for the introduction. I suppose I'm going to spend the next few minutes setting the scene for my fellow speakers and telling you why batteries are front and foremost of government's mind right now. So it's no secret that the UK faces some massive environmental challenges right now. So we have the fairly urgent problem of air quality in our major towns and cities, and we also have a big obligation around our greenhouse gas emissions. So the UK, in fact, Theresa May yesterday announced that the UK wants to be the world's first major economy to legislate for net zero carbon in 2050 and laid the statutory instrument in Parliament yesterday. Transport emissions is a fairly big chunk of our greenhouse gas emissions in the UK. It's responsible for about a third of them. The energy sector is decarbonising quite rapidly. This focus is shifting towards transport, and of that, road transport is a massive chunk, well over 3/4 of transport emissions in itself. And so electrification is really, really important to us. So back in May last year, just over a year ago, the Prime Minister announced the first of our Future of Mobility Grand Challenge missions, which is to put the UK at the forefront of the design and manufacture of zero-emission vehicles and for all new cars and vans to be effectively zero-emission by 2040. And it's my team in OLEV's job to help deliver that mission, along with colleagues in BAYS on the manufacturing side. We published a strategy shortly after that in July of last year, which set out a timetable to 2030, in the interim to 2040, where we have said that by 2030 we want to see at least 50% and as many as 70% of new car sales being ultra-low emission and up to 40% of new van sales being ultra-low emission. That is a very challenging ambition, and we are working quite closely with industry on how we best deliver that. We also said that we would review the situation in the years, particularly in the run-up to 2025, and consider whether government needed to intervene. We are seeing progress. So OLEV has been in existence for about 7 years now, but has really ramped up over the last 4 or 5 years. At the moment, we see a 2.6% market share of new car sales in the UK being ultra-low emission. That may seem low, but we're talking about an S-curve, an innovation S-curve. This isn't supposed to be a linear trajectory, and at some point that will tip so that you'll go quite rapidly from, say, 10-20% up to, say, 60-70%. What we don't know is when that trigger point is going to be, but we believe it could be sometime in the 2020s, and we need to be ready for that, both from an electricity system benefit, but also make sure that the industrial base in the UK is ready for that, and that is what we are working with BAYS colleagues to do. Taxis is a big success story for the UK. We are actually almost at 2,000 ultra-low emission vehicle taxis on UK streets. We are one of the best in the world at taxis. We have the LEVC production in Coventry and more taxis coming from other companies. We are also one of the best in the world at infrastructure provision. So we have over almost 100,000 now domestic charge points. We have almost 20,000 public charge points across the UK, 2,000 of which are rapid charge points. We need more infrastructure, we know that, but we are doing reasonably well, again, on a global scale. And as I say, there is much more to do. So just talking, we have, in terms of the policies that we have in place right now, to help uptake of the vehicles themselves, it's about generating consumer demand and helping the manufacturers get supply and allocate supply into the UK market. We have a series of vehicle grant schemes that help us do that, which are subsidies off the price of vehicles. We're working with dealerships to make sure that people on the shop floor are trained. EV sales, anybody who's been into a dealership probably knows that they're better at selling ICE engines than they are at selling EVs at the moment. We're working very closely with dealerships to help help generate the skills that are needed to help sell EVs. We do work with the Treasury on the tax system to make sure that there are fiscal measures to help consumer price of EVs. And we are working on launching a consultation on green number plates. So all electric vehicles could have a green number plate, which helps to identify on the road to generate that consumer interest in these vehicles, get people interested and get people going into dealerships to find out more about them. And we obviously have new car regulations coming from the European Union, which will also help manufacturers allocate supply into the UK. As I said, we do believe we're doing well on infrastructure. We need to do more. We need to support one of the best infrastructure networks in the world if we want people to buy these vehicles and if we want to see all new car sales being zero emission by 2040. We have a large kind of pot of money called the Charging Infrastructure Investment Fund, a £400 million pot, which is due to launch shortly, which is designed to help public rapid charge points roll out across the UK. We are also shortly to consult on regulating for all new homes to have a charge point. If we want everyone to have these vehicles, and most people have off-street parking, over 60% of the UK, then their homes have to have a charge point, so we need to make sure that that happens. We also have a number of grant schemes to help consumers put charge points in their homes in workplaces. Importantly, we also have an Act of Parliament which passed, again, shortly after the Prime Minister made her announcement last year, which is one of the first acts of its kind. It's a facilitating act, so we don't have to bring forward the regulations in this act, but we will do if industry don't deliver a consumer offer for charging. So that means that when somebody turns up to a charge point, it has to work, they have to be able to access it, they have to be able to pay easily, and we have a number of regulations that will allow us to act and intervene if the market don't deliver those provisions. And also in terms of, I said we need to prepare for this mass uptake. We need to make sure the electricity system can manage the load that's going to be on it. And a key part of that is that all these charge points are smart, that they can communicate with each other and with the grid so that those managing the load can turn them up and down where required. And we're about to bring forward regulations on that as well. But this isn't just about our environmental obligations. This is actually a massive opportunity for the UK right now. So this is also a key part of our industrial strategy. The vehicles themselves, total cost of ownership is lower, so they're a better cost for consumers and businesses. It's good for energy security, but there are also some very massive innovation opportunities for the UK. We have obviously the Faraday Battery Challenge, which is part of why we're here today, which is a £246 million R&D fund into battery development. We have numerous other R&D funds into the power electronics, so the motors and infrastructure as well. So the future of infrastructure isn't necessarily big charge points, but wireless and other innovative technologies. And we are also one of the only people in the world seriously looking at what's called vehicle-to-grid as an energy storage mechanism. So this is where the car battery itself can be used as a storage system to help supply electricity back to the grid. So this is all a really good opportunity for us, and it's I think estimate that this is a tens of £1 trillion market that the UK can grasp if it's one of the first movers, and that's what we in government want to see. So I think just want to finish on what Theresa May, we had a big zero emission vehicle summit back in September, and a quote from Theresa May that this isn't just a problem for government and it isn't just a problem for the UK, it's a shared problem for government and industry and the world to come together to tackle some of the challenges that we face. So.
Thank you. Vicky, thank you very much. That was perfectly, actually under time, so that's amazing. Our next speaker is Dr. Colin Herron, who has 40 years of experience in the automotive industry, much of it at Nissan. In 2011, he founded Zero Carbon Futures, and he works with the Mayor of London and Transport for London on their future plans for electric vehicles. Colin.
Evening, everybody. That's me. Go back to 1973. I left school and I started an apprenticeship. The apprenticeship, ironically, was making crankshaft seals for Ford engines. That's what we used to supply. Then I joined Nissan around 87, and in my last years with Nissan, I was seconded to local government. When I was in local government, I met a civil servant who mentioned something about electric car from Nissan. In 2009, I went to Japan and I test drove the Leaf. It was actually disguised as a Tida, and we drove it around a little test track. I had no concept that this vehicle was coming. Anyway, we came back to the UK, we worked with OLEV, and we decided, wouldn't it be a good idea if they're going to make cars in a factory when they came out, there was some infrastructure? because it would be a bit embarrassing if they came out and there was nowhere to plug them in. So with OLEV, we put the Northeast infrastructure in, and we put the first regional network of rapids. So from that work, we've evolved into doing a lot of research into who does what, where, and when. And if anybody follows me on LinkedIn, my favorite target is people who are blowing this industry out of proportion. I just wanted to point out where Zero Carbon Futures is, because lots of people think the Midlands is the center of the universe. I've just put the mileage on there just to prove that Tyneside is not only the center of the UK, it is the center of the universe. Fortunately, I'm right next door to Nissan, which is quite helpful, and we'll have another speaker coming on from that. So, the Northeast has got a bit of a heritage on electricity. A guy called Charles Parsons, some of you might know about this guy, Joseph Swan, and Lord Armstrong. Now, Joseph Swan's got a bit of a challenge on the electric light bulb with some Americans, but never mind. We'll just stick with the truth. The first house in the world to be lit by hydroelectric power is up in Northumberland. The first street to be lit by electric power is in Newcastle. And the first lighthouse, which I was amazed to find out. Anyway, moving forward. As I came into King's Cross today, one of the new Azuma came in, which is made in our region, and the Leaf. And importantly, why we're here, is the battery. Let's go forward now to the power networks that we have in the UK. The current system is we generate power, it goes into the grid, it goes into a house. The best we can do is we can put a bit of solar on, which then allows a little bit to go back to the grid. The reason I've got the car in the triangle is the current car has got nothing to do with this. All it does is waste energy, apart from the fact it kills us as well indirectly. So there's no link at all. As we go forward, we have this pattern here. So at the moment, the power flows will go into possible induction charging, static, dynamic, etc. However, all of this is possible. It's an untorn tap of possibilities of power moving in all directions. And of course, the government hope if we get this really smart, it'll offset building power stations. The only problem we've got is at the moment, the sums don't add up. Now, there's a big stadium there, but I'm not going to mention that because I know Peter's going to mention it. So at the moment, we've got the option of power flowing all over the place. Right. But we've got some challenges. The battery itself has got a power curve. Now, one of the challenges with the power curve is if you go to the petrol pump and you stick your pump in, you know exactly what you're going to get in 5 minutes. When you charge your car, you do not know what you're going to get in the period of time, because not every maker, every model has got a different power curve. So 80% to fill some cars is 30 minutes, but it might be different. You might hear about 350 kilowatt charging. You might, but that'll be a long time away. We don't know how the batteries are going to degrade, but what I do know from our research is as it degrades, it takes longer to fill. And I'll tell you why that's important. What is going to be the capacity for the common person? Is it 40 kilowatts? Is it 60? Is it 80? I'll tell you why that makes a big difference. And what is going to be the chemistry? What is the final chemistry? Is it going to have a lot of cobalt in? Is it going to be lithium? We don't know. So if we go to the left and we look at the infrastructure, we have AC charging, we have DC charging. The AC charging is low power and it's quite linear. The DC charging varies a lot. Now, I hear a lot of people say, we do not have enough infrastructure. And I ask everybody, so how much should we have? Well, we don't know. Because the number and amount of infrastructure we have is a function of the number of vehicles, the charging curve of the vehicles, and the behavior of you lot. And most of you don't drive electric vehicles, so we don't know what you're going to do yet. So we've got to try and guess a national network of chargers based on what you might do, which is causing big problems, and the battery chemistry and the car makers won't tell us what they're doing. So we now have 3 kilowatts to 350. So there's a lot of publicity about the fact you'll fill a car in 5 minutes to 350 kilowatts. No, you won't. That is a long, long way off. But one of the problems we have is if we put an infrastructure in for a 1 hour charge, and it then takes 5 minutes, we're probably going to put 5 times as much infrastructure in as we actually need. So if we do go to solid-state batteries, it's actually going to be a positive and a negative. We also have a problem with PHEV versus BEV. And what this affects is the viability of the infrastructure, because it has to make money. And at the moment, the infrastructure, though everybody thinks we don't have a lot, is tremendously underutilised. One of those rapid chargers costs £45,000 to put in. And to fill a car is about £5, and most of them get used twice a day. So you can see the problem. On the other side, we've got the question of battery manufacture. Where they're going to be made and how we're going to do it. If we make 19 million engines in Europe, we're going to have to make 19 million batteries. At the moment, we make 50,000, which is a bit of a challenge. Some people buy cells in and make their own packs. We then get to the question of skills. Somebody asked me how many people need to be trained in batteries, and I said about 30 million. I go to a pub and somebody says, what do you know about batteries? What do you know about EVs? So I have to tell them. So it goes from people saying, I'm thinking of buying one, to somebody who's got to fix one. And then what do we do when we take them out the vehicles? We're talking about 400 volts, 800 volts. It's industrial machinery. It will kill you if you get it wrong. First responders. What happens when an electric car hits a petrol car, hits a hydrogen car, hits a diesel car, and they catch fire? First thing you do is run. But apart from that, somebody's got to deal with the problem. So we've got to train the whole fire service. We've got to train the police. We've got to train the ambulance service into what these vehicles do. Second life. When they come out, how are we going to repurpose them? Is there actually a market? Is there a value for these batteries? We don't actually know yet. Apprentices. We got lots of apprentices being trained on standard motor technology. We need to start training the young people of the future. And I would argue degrees, it's absolutely pointless now, unless you're going into research, taking a standard degree in automotive or mechanical engineering. You can't survive. I'm a mechanical engineer, and boy, am I struggling at what an electron is. I tried to understand the electron, I got into particle physics, and at the end, I'm giving up. It's too hard. But we need to address the skills, we need to address the infrastructure, but until we decide what a battery is and what the performance characteristics of the battery are, we can't do either. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Next speaker is Peter Stevens of Nissan Motor. He is Head of UK External and Government Affairs.
Great, thank you very much. And it's always a pleasure to follow Colin, because he's done a much better sales job for the North East than I have. And I just want to endorse everything that he said. What I would say is Nissan, we've been in the business of making electric vehicles in the UK now for just coming up to a decade. We make the Nissan Leaf based in Sunderland, and Sunderland is also the home of the UK's first gigafactory making electric vehicle batteries. My background is as a terrible inorganic chemist. I did this decent thing after finishing my PhD and deciding that world of research wasn't for me. And I went to work in the water industry because I was particularly interested at how science met the real world, how that interface between pure science and then the applied lives that we live, how that works. And from the water industry, I ended up working in government, looking at the policy framework. So I particularly worked on renewable energy, then I looked on labour markets, and finally looked at European policy before joining Nissan. And what I'm doing in Nissan is looking at the environment that we need, the policy environment we need to decarbonise transport and to create the electric ecosystem of the future. And what I want to do in the next 10 minutes is talk a little bit about the journey that we're on as an industry from a manufacturer's point of view, and also give a pointer to some of the opportunities that we see ahead. So I'd like to take you back a little bit. This is a previous model of mobility, and whatever you might say about it, it was certainly functional, it was certainly sustainable, but it probably wasn't much fun. And if we look forward, there's really a revolution that came along with the internal combustion engine, and all of a sudden driving became fun. Moving from 4 miles an hour up to the heady speeds nowadays, the joy of the open road. And today, mobility is seen both as a rite of passage. If you've got teenage children, you know how much they long for their 17th birthday so they can get loose on the roads. I am terrified of that as a parent. But you also see it as a right, and there is a sense now that we have a right to mobility when we want it, on demand and affordable. But this comes with a challenge, he says, which is around the air quality challenge. So we have to acknowledge that our mobility comes with environmental consequences, both in terms of air quality and concerns about pollution within cities, but also in terms of carbon dioxide and the challenge of climate change. And this will particularly come to the fore as we see the developing world wanting to take hold of the mobility which we now claim as a right. So how do we manage this transition from a fossil fuel-based economy to a clean energy economy? How do we decarbonize our economy? And particularly, how do we decarbonize transport? And it's been interesting looking at the work the Committee on Climate Change has done around the decarbonisation of transport and recognising that decarbonising transport is one of the early wins that we can make. It's one of the ones where the technology is already existing that we can exploit. And it's, I believe, particularly important because it's something that we as individual citizens can do to make our contribution to this transition. But this isn't a new game. So Nissan made its first electric vehicle back in 1947. And so there's a lot of talk about this being a new technology. It isn't. Admittedly, the range wasn't great and the top speed wasn't great. It used lead-acid batteries. But what you see now is a huge expansion of electric vehicles. We anticipate that in the next year, there'll be something like 20 different models of electric vehicle coming onto the market. And so we do see the market being at a tipping point. Even in the 4 or 5 years that I've been working with Nissan, the discussion about electric vehicles has gone from niche to mainstream. So we're seeing an acceleration of this debate. But it's an interesting question. I put these two images up there. Which makes more sense, a petrol-powered phone or an electric-powered car? But yet we still have this mentality that a car has to be petrol-powered. But if you look at the example of the phone, when I first bought my mobile phone, it was a brick. I didn't know why on earth I would want to text anyone. I was only buying it for the minutes, but I didn't have any friends who had a mobile phone, so no one phoned me. Oh, you can go R at that point. But if you look at now how we use our mobile phones, they are no longer telecommunication devices. We no longer use our free minutes. Each month, I look at my mobile phone statement and find I've not used any minutes because nowadays it's all about VoIP, it's all about data services, and our phone has gone from being a voice communication tool to being our common everyday gateway to the internet. So our model of use of the phone has changed, and the business models around the phone have changed. So we've moved into an app economy away from a model that was based on voice communications. And I believe you're going to see the same transition around the car. The role of the car is going to change from just being an instrument of mobility to being a wider part of our lives. And we talk about intelligent mobility, and we have 3 pillars that we identify within this. The first is about intelligent drive, so looking at how connected and autonomous technologies are going to make our driving experience safer and more convenient. We talk about intelligent power, which is about the move towards electrification and the replacement of fossil fuels as a traction fuel. And finally, we talk about intelligent mobility, intelligent integration, which is looking at how the car integrates into a wider ecosystem and into our lives. And that's what I wanted to focus on in particular. And so when we talk about integration, there are a number of areas in which we see that integration taking place. So we already have GPS systems. We already have the potential for Bluetooth connectivity connecting to your mobile phone. But in the future, we're going to see our car interacting with other cars and with the transport infrastructure. We're going to see interfacing also and integrated into power networks. And what I wanted to talk about was this vision then of what an integrated future might look like. So this is an example of how you could integrate an electric vehicle using technology that's available now into your everyday life. So everything from solar panels on the roof to a static storage system that enables you to optimize that use of PV arrays on your roof, looking at using the storage in the battery and then feeding into a smart grid, feeding into the grid and drawing from the grid as the grid requires. And we've been doing some work already. Colin neatly teed up a project we've been involved in with the Johan Cruyff Arena in Amsterdam, which is looking at just this process. So we've now installed the largest integrated static storage system in Europe, using the batteries from about 148 Nissan Leaf to produce 3 megawatts of storage. And that is going to be able to not only act as a power supply for the arena when holding events in case of any interruption, but it allows them also to optimize the generation, the renewable energy generation from the solar roof. It also allows them to load manage on the arena, to manage down the peaks and troughs on the arena, and also to support EV charging in the car park. We're also involved in projects in Denmark, which are looking at fleets using vehicle to grid, where our initial experience is that fleet operators are able to generate a revenue by making the battery storage in their vehicles available to the energy network to stabilize the energy network. And even this past week, I was listening on the radio this morning to the Today program. They had a piece where I think 2 weeks ago, the energy price went negative. So typically the energy price is around about £50. It went minus by £50. And the point they were making was if you had a static storage system, such as the one that we've put in the Amsterdam Arena, you could draw down and be paid to charge your battery during that period and then release it back onto the grid. So this is an area that we see has immense potential for the future. But looking beyond that, we anticipate that by 2022, there'll be something like 1 million electric vehicles on the road. Now, once those electric vehicles come to the end of their life, we find that the battery still has something like 75% of its capacity left. So this offers an opportunity for second life battery storage and what that might do to the future energy network. At the moment, our energy network is based on a centralized system of large power stations connected to centers of population using large wires going across countryside. When we have this opportunity that comes from a supply of second life batteries coming onto the market at a reasonable price, what's that going to do for our model of our energy system? It could unlock vast amounts of intermittent renewable generation, such as PV, such as onshore and offshore wind, onto our energy grid. So batteries, I think, will lead not only to a revolution in terms of mobility, not only to a zero carbon transport, but also will radically change the shape of our energy network. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Peter. Our final speaker is Jo Coleman of Shell. She's worked for Shell for 20 years, and she is their UK Energy Transition Manager. Jo.
Thank you. Obviously, I'm very eager. So by way of background, I'm an engineer, and it makes me particularly honoured, actually, to be standing here and a little bit in awe of this room and the history that's in here. Let's go on to my slides. So I was, sorry, I should also say I'm from the Midlands, so I have a slight disagreement with these guys. I'm an engineer by background, as I said. I joined the energy industry, and I joined Shell, actually, straight from university and worked in oil and gas. And I joined the energy industry because, for me, energy is just what makes our lives go round. It's what makes the world we live in today. And I worked for Shell for about 20 years. And then I joined a company called the Energy Technologies Institute, based here in the Midlands, developing and demonstrating some of the technologies that we were going to need throughout the UK's energy transition, including things like the integration of vehicles and electric vehicles into our energy system. I returned to Shell just over a year ago to manage all of Shell's activities related to the energy transition in the UK. So you might think, why would Shell be interested in, as this says, the age of electricity? Why would I be here talking about a future of an electrified economy? It all starts from our support for Paris and the Paris Agreement. And here in the UK, we've very openly also supported the CCC's recommendations that are now being adopted by the UK government to aim to tighten the targets from 80% in 2050 to 100%, so net zero emissions in 2050. But when we think about the Paris agreements, we think about them in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. And they were kind of going through being released about the same time as Paris was developing. And there are 3 of those that are particularly relevant to energy. So the first of those is no poverty, ending poverty globally. There are, the global population is expected to grow from about 7.8 billion today through to about 10 billion by the middle of the century. And that's a lot of people who then need access to affordable and clean energy. So we need affordable and clean energy, but we also need to deal with climate change. And that means that as the energy industry, we've got a dual challenge. We need to deliver more energy to bring more people out of poverty, but we also need to make it cleaner. And that's at the heart of how Shell sees its purpose. Our purpose is to deliver more and cleaner energy solutions. So when we think about this future, we're quite famous for using scenarios. We've been developing scenarios in Shell for about 50 years. And we use them to inform our own strategy, but we also use them to engage externally. And our latest scenario, called Sky, is a scenario that meets the goals of the Paris Agreement. It shows that we can deliver that in a way that is technically, economically, and industrially possible. But it is tremendously challenging. And in order to deliver that, there's a requirement basically for governments, for industry, for consumers, for society to collaborate and work together. And we see this as kind of a process of sort of, if you like, mutually reinforcing drivers of change. And in order to meet these targets, we need to see things like a trebling of energy efficiency. We need to see the end to deforestation. We need to see radically new policies. We need to see capture of emissions. But perhaps most relevant for today, we need to see a massive increase in the electrification of final energy. So a 5-fold increase potentially globally from today. But in the UK, that will be, say, taking electrification of end-use demand from about 20% today through to about 60% by the middle of the century. And where will that energy come from? Well, in our Sky scenario, and it is only a scenario, it's not a forecast, but in our Sky scenario, we see solar as the dominant energy source by about 2050. In the UK, and sadly, that is not the case. We've all lived the same week of rain. So in the UK, we see that very strongly being wind. So why does electrification go up? Well, I think we've heard it also from our other speakers that it's about, part of it is about electrification of transport. So in our Sky scenario, and this is global, about half of new cars need to be electric by 2030. And by 2050, all of new cars need to be electric or low emission. Now, that's a tremendous undertaking, but countries like the UK need to go quicker, and they can go quicker. So in Sky in the UK, we see no new sale of electric vehicles earlier than the 2040 date we have in legislation today as a target today. So what do we as Shell want to do about it? What are we doing about it? Because we see tremendous opportunity in power for Shell. So, and the UK is actually a testbed for us for much of that. So the first thing that we've done in the UK, one of the things we've done in the UK is buy an energy company. We bought First Utility, and we've recently rebranded it as Shell Energy. So we now sell power and gas and smart solutions to around 800,000 homes in the UK. And we've just heard actually about the smart solutions, and in a way, I agree very much with what Peter said. In it, almost we will become competitors in the future, which is the way our industry will change. So we own a company called Sonnen, who develop and install batteries in homes. There are over 10,000 homes in Germany with a Sonnen battery in them, where they can store their home-produced energy, and they can also sell it to their neighbours. They can sell through the Sonnen network to other people. We also know that people are going to want to charge their cars at home. So we own Motion, who are one of Europe's biggest charge point operators. They operate a network of about 100,000 charge points across Europe. They're small in the UK, but big in Europe. And all their charge points are smart. And as we've heard, that's really important. So we've been buying what I like to think of as pieces of the jigsaw, and this is now around really knitting them together. And what isn't shown on this chart is that we also want to invest in offshore wind. In fact, we are investing in wind, both onshore and offshore, outside the UK. But in the UK, we haven't yet been successful in doing so, but we certainly want to. But we know as well that this isn't just about energy use in the home, because although I think most people would like to charge a car in their home, not everybody has a driveway. There's the 40% who don't. And we also know we want to go on journeys. We want to go on longer journeys, and we want to be able to charge on the go. So we're rolling out rapid charge points at our retail sites around the UK. And a lot of our retail sites they're not central city ones outside of London. They tend to be on A roads and motorways, so places where you want to stop when you're on a journey. So I hope I've illustrated a little bit about how we think about the future, but also some of the steps we want to take in that journey. Because we see tremendous opportunity in this, but it's not just for us. This isn't just about the car, it's about the home, and it's about how it all integrates together. Thank you.